We'll go ahead and get started. I have 3 past the top of the hour. Thanks everybody for joining this town hall for spring of 2021. I'm sure we'll have other folks filter in as we go. This is a presentation of Alpine Heritage Preservation. That's the nonprofit that owns Cottrill's Opera House. We're really excited to share with you some of our progress and also to field any questions you might have about what comes next. So first, by way of introduction, my name is Matt Hauger. I've served as the volunteer president for Alpine Heritage Preservation for the past 2 years or so. AHP, which is a acronym you'll hear thrown around a lot tonight, is the nonprofit that owns the Opera House and is working to restore the building. We currently have 11 board members, all of us volunteers, and we're certainly keeping busy. I've been involved in the project in some form or another since 2015. My family and I first moved to Tucker County in 2012. I'm married to Emily Wilson, who works as Projects and Programs Director for Woodlands Development Group, and our daughter Kat is 6 years old now and loves both dinosaurs and princesses. You can see the other folks listed here from the board, and they'll all introduce themselves as we go, but those are our other speakers for tonight. So this is our agenda for this evening. First, we'll share some highlights from our annual report, which we published earlier this spring. We'll also briefly remind you of our nonprofit's mission. Then we'll have an opportunity to reflect on the early days of the Opera House and the challenges that this project has overcome in terms of the building's deterioration over the decades. Then we'll share an update on our progress these past 2 years, from exploratory conversations to a market study and operations projection, and then to conceptual design work, which just wrapped up a few months ago. We'll share some exciting next steps, some signs of real progress that you'll see this spring and this summer, and some big behind the scenes steps towards the building's full redevelopment. And finally, we'll share some ways that you can partner with us, and we'll open up the floor for your ideas and questions. Let me invite you to visit our website, where you'll find a rundown of the building's history, an overview of the project itself, links to our social media feeds, and an online donation link. You'll also find ways to contact us, and we always welcome questions and feedback and phone calls. We'd love to stay engaged with you. Last month, we did publish our 2020 annual report, which is available on the website as well. I'd encourage you to check that out. It includes a note from me about all the things you're going to hear about tonight. There's an outline of the Opera House's history, if you're not familiar with all the turns and steps and progressions and steps backward that have happened over the decades. There's a summary of our recent progress. There's a 2020 financial statement, and there's a thank you to all of our donors, contributors, and partners. I did want to highlight some of those before we move on. First, on the left-hand side here, you'll see the list of our 2020-2021 board members. These volunteers have given many, many hours to this project, and we would be sunk without them. Many of them have also given to the project financially, which is a testament to their enthusiasm for the building's redevelopment. We also want to celebrate our organizational contributors, including the Benedum Foundation, Oakland Foundation, Tucker Community Foundation, and the Cultural District Authority. Wanted to thank Tom Preston and Woodlands and the WVU Law Clinic, who haven't given money to the project at this point, but have contributed just about everything else that has helped us to get to this stage. And finally, you'll see the list of individual contributors, donors from the 2020 financial year. Here's our mission statement as an organization. We want to restore Cottrill's Opera House to its historic role. We want it to be what it always was, a performing arts venue, a community center, and a cultural hub, driving sustainable economic development for Tucker County and the entire Potomac Highlands region. I mentioned having the building be what it always was. Cottrill's Opera House was built well over a century ago now, in 1902, as a vaudeville theater by a former mine superintendent and saloon owner. When Prohibition arrived, the saloon was suddenly not very profitable anymore, and the owner, Hiram Cottrill, for whom the building is named, sold the theater to the Sutton family. This would be in the 19 teens. They converted it to show silent films and would own the movie theater for nearly half a century. Over the decades, Tucker County's population declined, and by the 1960s, television was competing for the audience's attention. The theater ultimately closed for good in 1977. In the late 70s and early 80s, snowmelt and rain infiltrated the building and caused serious damage to the brickwork, to the mortar, and even to the beams inside. We are fortunate to have Bobby Snyder as a member of our board, and he remembers those conditions all too well. So we wanted to invite Bobby to share some memories of the building's early condition. Bobby, are you with us on the call?
I'm still here.
So how long have you been involved in the Opera House project? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with the building.
I can't remember exactly, somewhere between 35 and 40 years I've been working with this. I was a member of Alpine Festival Association in Davis with a lady called Anita Barton, who was the president of Alpine Festival and ran an information center. We were running many events called the Blackwater 100, the Governor's Cup, the Canaan 50 horse race, the 24 Hours of Canaan mountain bike race, and many started the Leaf Peeper Festival, many things like that. When Anita came in one day and said she wanted to buy the theater and start a project to renovate it. And we thought she was crazy, of course, but Anita was a wonderful woman and she went ahead, whether we said yes or no, we knew she was going for it. And she somehow formed an organization and we took it over as Alpine Festival. And I think they realized the charter of the Alpine Festival was for events, not for historic renovations. So we had to form a new charter called Alpine Heritage Preservation. And Anita did all of that and organized the whole thing. The main problem when we went into the theater was that it was a little too late to save it. It was already leaking through the inside gutters and the water was pouring down the brick walls and the carpet was soaking and there was a lot of mold and stuff, and we had absolutely no money to begin with. So we had to form an organization and started raising funds and doing the best we could with what we had. And Walter Rinaldi, who owns Sirianni's right now, was a major fundraiser and got organizations together. And we got a roof on it. It was a temporary roof back then. We've replaced that and put a pretty good roof on it now. But at least we stopped the leaks. And then we had to decide how to clean it out. And really just, we had a group of boys from the Davis Center, many trucks of stuff and lots of pizzas to feed them for lunch to clean out the mold and the carpets and all the stuff that was destroyed, just try to get it out of there to start deciding how we are going to structurally save the building.
Right. There's one particular instance from that era that I wanted to ask you about. It's become almost infamous in the history of this building. Tell us about the legendary icicles inside the theater.
There was, well, obviously we have cold winters up here. That's why they built so many ski areas. But Walter Rinaldi and I walked in as members of the board one cold day. We were checking out the Opera House. You had to do regular checks like Martin Williams is doing now. And we went in and there was huge icicles coming from the second balcony all the way down to the ground floor. And the whole floor in the front of the stage was solid ice. It's like an ice skating rink. And it was gorgeous. It was like a crystal palace inside. The lights from the windows, it was just unbelievable. But it was huge icicles coming down. But there was one that was so big, and that's the one the story started. And I think that's Walter Rinaldi. But Walter and I ice skated on the floor and all of that with the ice. I'm not sure how that story got told or where it came from, but I think that's the one that you're talking about.
No, absolutely. Well, obviously, as you mentioned, things are a lot different now. New roof, 2 new roofs along the way, stabilized walls, operating storefronts. how gratifying has it been for you, who have been engaged for such a long period of time, to see the building saved from deterioration?
I think watching most of the other people who were much more brilliant than I was to raise the funds to, when they told us we had to jack up the roof and lift the roof, the weight of the roof off the walls so they could repair the brick walls. These brick walls were soaked and frozen and breaking, and down at the base, in the basement, they were ready to collapse. So our job was to stabilize the building so that we could start thinking of what we would do next. And we had to put this frame in to jack the roof up and take the weight of the roof off the walls so we could repair the building and save it. That was probably the most fascinating whole period that I worked with. As long and also working with the first architect, Tracy Stevens from Wheeling. I was the young guy back then. I think I was in my late 30s, and I could do things that I can't do now, but I had to crawl all over the building and measure it all from measured drawings. Now, we didn't have computers back then, so everything had to be done with tape and yellow pad and pencil. So yeah, that's how old I am.
Well, on behalf of the entire community and the board, I want to thank you for your dedication and your diligent work over the years. It's because of you and folks like Walt Rinaldi and folks like Anita Barton that the building is still standing and poised for a transformation. So again, thank you, Bobby.
Then many, many other people. I was one little teeny spoke in the wheel.
Thanks again, Bobby. Appreciate you sharing those stories. So let's move from relatively ancient, not really ancient, but decades old history to the more recent progress we've made. So almost exactly 2 years ago in the spring of 2019, a reconstituted, a re-energized Opera House board kick-started the project back into active development. And I'd like to invite another longstanding rock star from the board to step us through our progress since then. Elaine George, are you out there?
I am, Matt.
All right, take us away.
I'm kind of worried that I might be a rock star, though. That's scary. Anyway, I'm Elaine George. I've been involved with the Opera House not near as long as Bobby has, only since 2011. But I'm very excited to see how far we've come in the past couple years or so. Back in spring of 19, our reformed board knew the end goal, but we weren't exactly sure how to get there. So we entered an exploration phase. As eager as we were to finish a physical design for the building, we realized that we weren't sure what the community actually needed from the space. How could we design a building when we didn't know what it would be used for? What sort of events would happen here? Who would run the building? And who would do the programming? So as a way to kickstart this conversation, we reached out to Dave Clark, who's the executive director of the Woodlands Development Group. Dave graciously agreed to run a roadmap planning workshop for us, and this was back in March of 19, which now seems like 1,000 years ago. He encouraged us to think critically and practically. What would the operating budget for the renovated Opera House look like? How would the organization break even, stay in the black, and keep the lights on? After all, in the 1960s and 70s, the building had become unprofitable as a movie theater. So what would be different this time around? So on one hand, we knew that the local economy had changed fairly dramatically. Storefronts that had been vacant for years were opening back up. The arts were driving a hyper-local economic resurgence, but still we wanted to think seriously about what the present day community could support. What sort of events would be most likely to stay in the black? What expenses could we expect to run for those sorts of events, like the licensing, the staffing, the ticketing, etc. So again, it became obvious to us that we needed help answering those questions. They were industry-specific questions about running a performing arts venue. It was time to do more homework, and we entered into what you might call the research phase. First thing, we sent a representative to a conference of the League of Historic American Theaters, where we started to get our heads around the challenges and opportunities of running a theater like ours. Next, we decided that we needed an expert's guidance, so we started looking for a theater-minded consultant who could help us answer some of these fundamental questions. Fortunately, we received a generous grant from the Benedum Foundation with which we could conduct this research. So we interviewed several candidates and eventually settled on Historic Theater Consultants out of Arizona, which was run by Herb Stafford. Herb was well recommended by our peers from the League of Historic American Theaters, and his proposal fit our needs very well. So Herb and his marketing lead visited Tucker County in December of 2019. They met with a wide variety of local stakeholders. That's Herb at the top left there, chatting with local business owners about how the Opera House could support the local economy. Herb and his team also conducted a public survey in January of 2020, and they delivered their final report in May of that year. So based on all this research that we've been having done, what's going to happen at the Opera House? First of all, film. This is the building's historic use. It spent over 60 years serving the community as a movie theater. Theater experts tell us that films are the easiest, most cost-effective way to reintroduce a venue to its community. That's partly because film is accessible. All sorts of people, everybody loves watching a movie on the big screen. So what sorts of film would we show? Art films, documentaries, film festivals, special screenings, classical and second-run movies, plus film events like Disney sing-alongs and themed costume nights and annual holiday traditions. Second, the Opera House would host live entertainment. We believe the Opera House would be a terrific place to see live performances like theater, dance, and especially music. The Purple Fiddle's already done an amazing job over the years building an audience for live music in Tucker County. In fact, we've had multiple conversations with John Bright, who's the owner of the Purple Fiddle. He's excited about the prospects of using the Opera House to raise Tucker County's profile for the performing arts. He and we believe that a renovated Opera House would expand our region's capacity for hosting live events by providing a venue for acts that might not be suited for other spaces. For example, like high-profile bands that could fill the 400-plus seat theater, listening concerts like jazz, classical, or art music, local and regional theater troupes, and touring dance companies. Third, the Opera House would be great for community events, wedding receptions, rehearsal dinners, anniversary banquets, conference receptions, and more. By renting the space for private functions, we hope to generate a key revenue stream, one that could make the difference between losing money and breaking even as a venue over the long term. Of course, these varied use cases require an architectural design that's flexible enough to shift from film projection to stage shows to community use. To talk us through our recent conceptual design phase, which sought to solve some of these questions, I'm going to turn this over to our Vice President, Ross Hoppe.
Thanks, Elaine. Hi all, my name is Ross Hoppe and I serve as the Vice President of the Opera House Board. So we knew that to help answer some of our big questions in terms of how to work to restore the entire building, we would need the help of an experienced architectural firm. This conceptual design work was partially funded by a grant from the Tucker County Cultural District Authority with funds provided by the Benedum Foundation. And after extended discussions and careful evaluation, we contracted the Mills Group, a renowned West Virginia architectural firm, to help us develop a conceptual design for the Opera House. So we feel strongly that Michael Mills and his firm are the perfect fit for our project. Their practice brings a combination of expertise in both preservation architecture as well as performing arts design to our project. A particularly relevant past project of theirs is the renovation of the historic performing arts venue in Morgantown, the Metropolitan Theater. We also have a great working relationship with the state's Historic Preservation Office, with whom we'll need to work hand in hand to carefully restore areas of the building and to be eligible for funding specific to historic buildings. But more on that in a little bit. So it may be a bit of an understatement to say that the Mills Group has been busy. We contracted them late last summer, and on October 9th, they came to Thomas to conduct a full survey of the building. For this process, they used a laser scanner to capture the 3D geometry of the entire building. The scanner, seen here on the left on a tripod, was used both inside and out to capture the current conditions and to measure all of the spaces. Here you can see Michael Mills placing the scanner on our stage. You'll notice a fair amount of the wooden shoring that has been used to stabilize the trusses that Bobby mentioned about earlier and to lift the roof. And there are also areas in the stage that have been damaged by water over the past years. So some holes and some loose spots. So the Mills Group took scans and spherical photos from 72 places around the Opera House, from the basement to the upper balcony and everywhere between. It was a very thorough process that spanned most of the day. Here's a glimpse of what the scanner was seeing from about the same spot as the last slide. We're looking out to the house, largely obstructed by wooden supports, and the stage is in the foreground. On the right, you can see a poster for Chicago in the stage right wing. We were provided a web-based viewer that allowed us to move from point to point within the Opera House, essentially looking around from every location where the scanner is placed. The white circle on the right of the photo is another location where the scanner was positioned during the day. The scan allowed the Mills Group to build a 3D computer model of the entire building, from the basement to the trusses in the ceiling. On the left-hand side, you can see how the scanner stitched together the existing facade. It's kind of a grainy looking photo, but that's actually what the scanner was seeing and what it was measuring, all compiled there. The larger drawing here is the current layout of the main floor of the theater. All the existing details were captured, including the rectangles. There are lots of little rectangles here, little dots almost here. Those are the wooden frame, that's the wooden framework that you could see in the last picture. One of the other major deliverables of the Mills Group current scope is a series of renderings that will help us to visualize the restored Opera House and to convey the vision to the community and all of our partners. So the rendering on the next slide is the first look at a restored Opera House that we are sharing publicly. We hope that you'll be as excited about it as we are.
That's cool.
And while I think there's a lot to take in here, we want to convey that this plan is about restoring the building to its historic role and its place on Front Street. The plan would include renovations to the street level lobby, the second floor lobby, the theater space, and more. Care is being taken to ensure the building is completely ADA accessible and comfortable for all of our guests. We're really pleased with the work that Michael Mills and the Mills Group is doing and are
It's gonna be good.
I know, it's gorgeous.
We got
you.
Ross. Ross, you got cut off there.
Yeah, we lost the last little bit there, Ross. Can you just
Oh,
give
no.
us that?
That's our broadband.
Well, where did you lose me?
Right after you said it would be comfortable for all of our guests.
Oh, well, the next part, and we're really grateful for the work that the Mills Group is doing, and we're eager to continue our partnership with their team. And we're excited to share future renderings as well as they become available. So I'm going to hand things over to Dave Esch to talk through a few current and upcoming happenings at the Opera House, and I'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. So I'm also on the board with the other folks that are with us here, Ross and Matt and Bobby, Elaine. It's a great group of people, very committed. So a couple of the things that are happening right now, we are getting new tenants in the ground floor of the building. It helps us to kind of not so much structurally, but economically stabilize the building. Ranger James has just moved in, and we hope that everybody will take a moment to drop in and buy something. But it's good timing because summer's upon us. COVID, fingers crossed, is going away. So it really is great timing. We are in discussions on our second storefront, and we do expect to have a tenant there for this summer. So again, kind of reinvigorating not just the building, but the board is very focused on the fact that we are a major part of Front Street in Thomas, and we want to help kind of the overall group of Thomas and the economic development. You saw that in our mission statement. So doing that in the short term, being sure that the building is contributing to the economic oomph of the area. It's I'm sure everybody on the call has walked up and down Front Street on a nice summer day. We want to be sure that we're adding to that. On the next slide, one of the immediate efforts that we're doing, we have a project coming up this summer. We are going to be putting up scaffolding and attending to our brick. Here you can see on the upper right, there are areas of the brick that have good mortar in them. There are other areas of the brick where, frankly, the mortar is missing. The lower left, under the window sills is a classic area where the mortar erodes. To do this, Ross, in the next slide, we were very fortunate with the help of Woodlands Development Group to get a grant from the West Virginia Department of Arts, Culture and History, the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, and a grant from the Tucker Community Foundation to help us do some repointing of this brick to stabilize it. Brick is a wonderful material. It'll last, it's still there in Rome 2,000 years later, but it needs to be attended to. And the grants that we've gotten from our partners is enabling us. Right now, we have bids being requested. They're coming in on Friday, and we do expect to be scaffolding the building over the summer, which, it's tough because we also want to be supporting our ground floor tenants. But this is kind of the tip of the iceberg in terms of the renovation that the board is intent upon having happen. A little bit of it is going to be happening this summer, which will help to maintain the building and eventually restore the entire building. It is all about fundraising. If anybody wants to contribute to the repointing, you're welcome to. But Ross is going to talk to us now about kind of the big picture of going forward.
Thanks, Dave. I hope my internet does a little better this time.
Yeah.
We have a lot of pieces of our planning puzzle in the works right now, and they're all kind of coming together, at the same time. It's a lot swirling. We know that one of our major next efforts will be in funding the restoration of the entire building. So with a building and project of this scope, significance, and history, there are a lot of factors that tie into that funding. We're excited about reaching this major milestone in the project, and it's fair to say that we're now in formal pre-development for the Opera House renovation. It's been a long road to get here, and we're eager to continue to build on our recent momentum. Even with all these different plans and studies moving, we're already looking forward to what will come after the conceptual design phase. One of the key products of the design work will be a preliminary estimate of the total redevelopment cost. With that number in hand, we can work backwards and think through our funding stack, what it will take to complete the work. For example, we'll be able to finalize our certification for historic tax credits with the State Historic Preservation Office and the National Park Service. Now, tax credits are likely to be a major funding source of this project. Between federal and state tax credits, we expect 45% of the qualified renovation costs could be covered. We don't know exactly how much that will be yet, but we know it will be substantial. Historic tax credits provide a dollar-for-dollar reduction of federal and state income tax liability, unlike a tax deduction, which lowers how much your income is taxable. The dollar value is calculated as a percentage of the qualified rehabilitation expenditures incurred during the course of the tax credit projects work. It's a complicated process, and we're really grateful that Woodlands Development Group has already started preparing this application on our behalf. We also know that grant-based funding may be a significant part of our overall funding. Woodlands also continues to explore potential grant funding opportunities for the project. For example, Woodlands recently helped pull together our application for a state-administered rural revitalization grant. We hope to hear back about that soon. And finally, in terms of funding, we know that you'll need support of a broad and generous community. We don't yet know the full redevelopment costs, but we do know that we'll never meet the needs without your help. To that end, we're preparing to engage a fundraising consultant who will initially begin work on a planning study, a study that helps us to understand our community's capacity for giving, identifies leadership of our capital campaign, and helps the board strategize and plan a capital campaign. We know that we don't have the experience or knowledge on how to run a successful campaign internally, so we plan to bring someone in to help us with that effort. So stay tuned as we announce more about that. So right now, how can you help? It's a lot to take in, but here's how you can help us today. Let people know about this presentation. Word of mouth is a great way to catch people up on our progress, to let them know that we are very active. We've been posting up a storm on social media. We're active on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Like, share, and comment on our posts. We try to reply to everyone who comments. Sign up for our email newsletters. We send updates 4 times a year, and we also send invitations to events like this.
That's how we do it.
Thank you. You can go to our website if you're not already subscribed, but I guess that you all are since you're here. Have a question or you want to learn more, email us at info@cottrillsoperahouse.org. We'll get back to you. And if you're interested in supporting Cottrill's Opera House financially, you can visit cottrillsoperahouse.org/donate or go right to our homepage. We're really grateful for the support of our community and what you've shown and every donation we've received. We would not have been able to continue this effort without your generous support. Well, at this point, I'd like to open things up for a Q&A. Probably have people unmute themselves and ask questions. If it gets crazy, we can figure out a different way to do it, including raising hands, but it's a nice small group here tonight, so we can,
Okay.
I think, manage things.
I've got stuff I've got to do.
If you'd rather type your question in the chat, you can also do that too.
That was interesting.
Mhm.
And Chris and Susan, you are not muted right now, so if you do have a question, feel free to jump in, but I'm glad you found it interesting.
Ross, one question that popped up earlier was, do we have any idea, and I know that you and I know the answer to this, but we have an expert on the line. Do we have any idea who might have performed in the Opera House's earliest days, like the vaudeville days before it was even a movie theater?
I think you're throwing that at me, Matt. This is Elaine. I am not an
Right at
expert nor a rock star, but there were back in the day before it became a silent movie theater and then obviously a talkie and everything, there would have been a rotating system set up that touring groups would travel from, all the little towns had one of these things, had a nice theater like this. Ours was probably best, but they would rotate. And of course the railroad station was essentially right out in front of Cottrill's Opera House. So when they were done for the night, they could walk out, they could stay overnight, or they could walk out, get on a train, and tomorrow morning they would be in Cumberland or wherever the next place was they were playing. They could rotate. So there was a lot of that, but there's anecdotal suggestions that George Burns and Gracie and that Jack Benny performed there. I've never been able to find anything in writing, a contemporary piece that documents that, but everybody says it. There was also, there's just recently, just in the past couple of months, we got a letter from a woman up in Thomas who found where her dad graduated 8th grade. The 8th grade graduation ceremony was held at it's just that the local sweet stuff is what gets me about it. So, but yeah, a lot of people what do you call it? Trip the light fantastic on that stage.
Definitely
That's
did.
great.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thanks, Elaine.
Well, I know it's a small room here tonight, but please feel free to jump in and ask us any questions. We're trying to keep this casual and informal and responsive to what our community is asking for.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hey, my question is sort of what is your ideal timeline? If all things go according to plan, when will we be able to go see a movie at the Opera House?
It's tough to hone in on an answer there because there are so many things swirling right now where we have all these different pieces of the puzzle coming together. What's exciting is that we do have momentum on the architectural front, moving into the fundraising front, and we have great support from Woodlands as well, looking at development on a larger picture. So it's hard to say how those pieces will really fit into how they'll stack up against each other. A few years is on the safe or on the optimistic side, let's say.
I would say that's probably to the capital campaign, correctly, that we had up on the screen. It all depends on the capital campaign and how fast we can raise money. And faster we can raise money, the faster we can have it open.
Also a good point, Bobby.
I have a question. I don't know if anybody can hear me.
We can hear you.
Okay. I used to be on the board of Valerie Theater with Reed Gilberts, and we're a very high supporter of the theater in Thomas, and we were extremely, very, very successful putting Shakespeare plays and so forth. Well, we didn't have the theater at the time. And so I know you're trying to reach to the community in different forms, but how can we be more active in what your goals are financially and so forth, that you really need the most for us to participate, to support what you're doing? And I know that when it will happen and when the theater will be open, it will be very successful, because I lived through that with the Valerie Studio with Reed Gilbert at a time.
I'm glad to chime in there, Ross. This is Matt. Thanks for sharing that, Annie. One of my favorite things about pouring through the upstairs of the Opera House is that I'm constantly finding artifacts from the Valley Ridge days, right? They're all over the place, just because it's the same world. It's the same theater world, and the stories of what Reed and you and others were able to do during that time frame is really inspiring. This ties into, for me, we have this relationship with ArtSpring, who has been the steward of Tucker County's arts world, and we have members of that board on this call tonight. We've always seen our missions as very much dovetailing together, that anything that happens for the good of the arts, performing or visual or musical in the county, is good for the Opera House. And conversely, the redevelopment of the Opera House is going to accelerate this arts-based resurgence in the community. So as COVID begins to recede, as Dave was talking about, and some of those performing arts type events start to spring up again, we would strongly encourage everyone to support ArtSpring's mission and the work of everyone else who's contributing to the arts in the county. Would welcome ArtSpring folks to chime in, or others on the board to add to that.
Hey, Matt, this is Dave. Let me just offer up, the question on the table being what can we do? You saw Ross's, kind of multiple parts of this doesn't all happen because one person, decides to fund the restoration of Cottrill's Opera House. One of the things that people can do is talk to your representative and tell them at the state level, at the county level, and at the federal level that this is very important to you personally. They listen to their constituents, and they have available to them funding, grants. That's going to be, as you could see in Ross's slide, that's going to be a big part of our making this happen. and they listen to their constituents. So, don't be shy about calling them and saying this project would be important to you personally.
Very true. Thanks, Dave. Any other questions or just comments, thoughts? We're here for you right now.
I just have a question, Bobby Snyder. Who was asking the question on Reed Gilbert? Because I was a pretty good friend of his, and I'm sorry, I'm old enough that I was there at a lot of his events. But I didn't catch who was asking that question.
Well, this is Annie Snyder and was on the board.
Oh, you're my wife. Okay. You're in
Yeah,
another
I
room.
was in our Valley Ridge studio, which at the time.
I'm
was
sorry,
a-
Annie. I didn't recognize your voice over Zoom.
Well, that's typical, isn't it?
Yeah, that sort of shocked me that somebody was were that old that we saw Reed Gilbert. So I just I wanted to know who asked
Well,
that.
I'm not too young, but Bobby, I was on the board, if you remember.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, you were very close to Reed Gilbert. Yep.
What a small
Okay,
world.
thank you. You answered my question. Sorry, we're in different rooms, so we don't know what we're talking.
Any other questions or comments or thoughts?
Yes, I was wondering if you had a discussion about who played at the Opera House, and occasionally I see posts of old theater bills. Is there any archive or limited records or anything that you've been able to either find statewide related to the Opera House if you all didn't inherit that?
Well, this is Matt. There's nothing comprehensive that we know about. We've done a fair bit of sleuthing, and you've seen evidence of that on the social media feeds. There are records, at the Parsons Advocate that we've been pulling from. There's some stuff in Morgantown that WVU holds. Bobby, what else am I missing? What other records have we already pulled from recently?
Well, the movie posters that were underneath the carpet that we found. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, that's a really good question. Whoever's asking it, I think it's David Brown, but I'm not sure. But that's a really good question, and we think there are many archives at West Virginia University. We're still trying to go back. Walter and I, 30 years ago, tried to go into West Virginia University. They have a ton of stuff, but they haven't sorted it out or individualized it for all of the state. And we think there's a lot of stuff in there from Cottrill Opera House, but we haven't been able to coordinate with anyone who can actually help us or sort it out. I think it's just going to take time and human beings to want to do it for all the state, not just Cottrill's Opera House. But I think there's a lot of information there that a lot of people in West Virginia, for all of their historic buildings, could benefit from. And I think it's being saved. I just think they haven't had the time to sort it out.
And there's one more resource that might be of interest, and that's the West Virginia Historic Theater Trail. I'm going to post a link in our chat here. It's a partnership between the State Historic Preservation Office and the Preservation Alliance of West Virginia. And that's kind of a catalog of theaters, historical theaters that I believe currently exist. Well, they do have a closed section as well. That's kind of snippet that talks about theater history in general in West Virginia.
Thank you. Yeah, the reason I ask is, so I'm David Brown. I have a small place in Davis. I live in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I'm a professional archivist. And I actually had been trying to do a little research on Cottrill's and also Thomas in general. I did go to the Parsons Advocate, and I did go to, had some colleagues I contacted at in West Virginia University, and actually spent some time a couple of years ago going through their described records, trying to find any, one that related to Cottrill's or theaters in general. And I think you're probably right that it's in the unprocessed there also may be something in Charleston in the state archives. I'm happily, extremely gainfully employed, so I've not had a chance to spend a lot of time, but I'd be willing as much as possible to try to assist in this effort, because I think if we could find primary sources related to the history of the Opera House, that really helps you to tell the story.
Wow,
That's amazing.
That would be awesome.
Recruited and signed up. We've been talking, Austin and I have been talking about this, David, our need for some sort of comprehensive history of the building. You know, everything, we have the Parsons Advocate records. We've even found a few limited issues of the old Italian language newspaper that was published in Thomas with its references to the Opera House, but finding a way to collate all that information and slot it in and preserve it for future stewardship. I would love to have a conversation with you about how we might collaborate on something like that if you're interested.
Sure, I'll add my contact to the chat right now, and then I can also follow up in to your all's email. But yeah, no, I'm interested for sure. I actually was trying to find an index or processed records at West Virginia University related to the Italian newspaper, because I actually thought that would be the key. I can't speak Italian, but there's sources out there that Google and others that if you're determined enough, you can pick it up. But I wasn't able to find anything comprehensive on that either. But I do think there's probably some sources out there. And like I said, I do have limited time, but I have an interest, and I would happy to try to assist where I can. And I'll add my contact information right now to chat.
I'm excited. This is good news.
Thank you.
That would be a great help.
Any other
questions? Who else is going to volunteer to help us with an amazing part of the redevelopment story?
Just a quick question to David Brown. David, you were the one that was asking that. You were the one that was talking right before, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know Walter Rinaldi that owns Sirianni's? Because you said you were in Davis.
I know who he is, but I don't know him personally.
Well,
that's actually a good point. Go ahead, please.
I would like to introduce you to him, because he has gone up to Morgantown and he might give you some people and some contacts, because he's been looking, he's sort of doing the same thing, but he's not a professional like you looking at archives. But if you can find Walter Rinaldi, he might give you a couple of hints.
That sounds good. And I also think there's an opportunity, and I'm happy to do what I can. I also caution that I only have so much time. Maybe 6 years from now when I retire, I'll have more. But I'm willing to offer the time that I can. And one of the things that may be interesting, which would take maybe other people besides myself, would look at starting with an oral history with people like Walter and some of yourselves, to tell those stories that you just told today, which then builds on potentially to finding the actual, the existing paper records where they may exist. So that's something to consider as well. And I don't want to hog this conversation. I just had an interest, so I wanted to make sure that I entered into the conversation.
You are not hogging this conversation. You are actually participating in the conversation, and that's what we want all of the people to do. Because we're looking for help in any way we can get it. And you're doing a wonderful job, David, and thank you very much.
Emailing you right now, David. Let's continue the conversation.
And by the way, we understand there's a lot of people here who are still working, and some of us who are still working but semi-retired, even though we're way too old. But we can't make the money that people can make in the cities. But we all try to do what we can. We don't expect people who are working to do everything. And we understand totally what you're saying, David. You can contribute whatever you can until you retire, and then you're going to be full-time.
I appreciate that. I just didn't want to create any false promises or expectations. So I was trying.
We understand those type of people because we've lived with them for 40 years right here. And that's a recreational community. So you have to look at the whole community and what we're looking for to draw into this theater to make a living for the theater, to make it exist without us constantly having to donate money to it. We're trying to make it self-sustain itself, and all of you can help us do that.
Bobby, let me chime in because I think the board as it's currently as it's currently made up of, it's very much about that. And I love this conversation because it's everybody brings to the table what they can. I'm an architect. I've done a substantial part of my career in preservation architecture, and I'm just trying to help. David, I would say that, from the point that you've made from a historic point of view, there is nothing that equates to an oral history. And if you have any amount of time to put into that, for future generations, it's gone. It's gone. If you don't touch people now and collect it, and what a wonderful thing that would be for Cottrill's to have some type of documentation of the people that currently remember what went on.
No, I'm interested. So yeah, we'll have an ongoing conversation. I'll see what I can do to help.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to thank everyone who came out tonight, and really grateful that you spent an hour of your Tuesday evening with us to learn more about the project and to become informed in different ways and to hear some great questions. Matt, do you have any final thoughts before we close things out?
No, not at all. I just, well, he says no, not at all, and then he keeps talking. I would just echo what Ross said. We're grateful for all of you joining, and we're totally eager to hear from you. So reach out to us if you have questions or ideas. This is a community effort, and we are stewards on behalf of the community, but all volunteers as well. So we'll continue the effort together.